Hello and welcome to Early Childhood Ireland's podcast, which features interviews and discussions on all issues relating to high quality in the early years and school age care sector. In our episodes, we've a range of speakers who are leaders in the areas that matter to Early Childhood Ireland members. This podcast series is proudly supported by Aricus Insurance, which offers a comprehensive range of cover at discounted premiums for both business and personal insurance products. So visit www.aricus.ie for more information. I'm Maura Corbett and I work with Early Childhood Ireland. Aistear, the Early Childhood Curriculum Framework, was initially launched in 2009, and as we've spoken about before, it was updated last year in 2024. This update took place to reflect the myriad changes in the early years sector and indeed in Ireland since 2009. In this series of the podcast, we're taking a closer look at some of the key changes and hearing from various people to talk about their views on these changes and the implications for practice. And today I'm delighted to chat with Fiona Kelleher, my colleague, who's Quality Support Manager at Early Childhood Ireland. Fiona worked on the consultation with babies, toddlers and young children that underpinned the update of Aistear, so we're going to talk a little bit about that. And we're also going to talk about the changes to the principles that underpin Aistear. So Fiona, I'm delighted you're here today. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Hi, Maura. Thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be here too.
So I mentioned the consultation. Can you tell us a bit first about that consultation, the form it took, the purpose of it, and so on?
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose, Maura, this was a really innovative step by NCCA, the National Council for Curriculum and Assessment, to actually go out and consult babies, toddlers, and young children in the revision of Aistear. And I personally was delighted to be involved in this piece of work. I um, had the opportunity to represent Early Childhood Ireland in the consortium, along with my colleague Liz Kearns and Carmel Ward. So we were thrilled to be part of it, even just not just because of the consultation with babies, toddlers, and young children, but also just the innovative, I suppose, concept that this involved. So it was really, really exciting. And it just what resonated with me was it wasn't just a top-down revision, it was a really meaningful consultation. There was a team from Maynooth University and Stranmillis University and ourselves, Early Childhood Ireland, who responded to a call from the NCCA to actually go out and hear from the babies, toddlers and young children themselves. And not just any consultation, we used a participation, action, research or PAR approach. That really means, I suppose, that early childhood educators weren't just facilitators. They were co-researchers in this project. So they led the work from within their own settings, using methods that they were already comfortable with, and that the babies, toddlers and young children were familiar with as well. And I suppose the idea was to give the babies, the toddlers and young children the opportunity to express themselves in ways that felt natural to them. Through play, drawing, photography, puppetry, role play. The team used, I suppose, a mosaic approach, which is just that beautiful way to describe combining all of these methods to really listen to what the children are telling us in all their different languages, focusing on that 100 languages of children from Reggio Emilia. And it all tied in with, I suppose, the other model that underpinned the research was Lundy's model of participation. I'm not sure if your listeners would have heard of it, but it's built around these four key ideas. Okay, so it's around space, voice, audience, and influence. And in this particular research project, the babies, toddlers, and young children were given the space to express themselves, the voice to be heard, a real audience, the researchers, and most importantly, influence, where their views actually shaped the framework, which was great. And so exciting, such an exciting project to be part of. Yeah.
And yeah, you mentioned about the Lundy model. Long-time listeners will know that there's actually an episode of the podcast with Laura Lundy, so you
Oh,
can
excellent.
go back and check that out
Oh, it's worth a listen.
if you're interested. Yeah, yeah. So can you take us through maybe some of the? I think that consultation kind of happened in two phases, didn't it?
It
There was
did.
a consultation on um, as part of the initial consultation, and then um, some revisions were made to the proposed revisions were made, and then it went out to consultation again. So you had two phases of it.
We did, we did. So the first phase, definitely, there was a lot of things that came up and a lot of things that the babies, toddlers, and young children told us through you know, through the data that was collected by the educators themselves. So maybe if I go through that first, and then you can see how it influenced into the revision of Aistear. So what really came through loud and clear, I think, was the importance of relationships. Babies, toddlers, and young children really told us through their actions, their drawings, their words, that their bonds with educators, friends, families, are central to their well-being and learning. And because of that, one of the biggest changes proposed in the updated Aistear was that expansion of the principle on relationships and interactions. Not just the child educator relationships, but friendships, and those connections between home and the setting. Um, and again, I think, relationships is the heart of was always the heart of Aistear. And it's just, again, a powerful reminder, really, that relationships are the foundation of everything in early learning. And they underpin how educators see and hear babies, toddlers, and young children, how they respond to their needs and their strengths in an attuned way, and how, I suppose, interactions lends itself to learning and development throughout. So the children told us that their relationships are the utmost important to them. And so areas we recommended for the updating of Aistear was to focus more on babies, toddlers, and young children's friendships, to help educators to understand what a slow, relational, nurturing pedagogy looks like, and to empower them to implement it. So that was really interesting. Another major theme that came through was citizenship. Even the youngest babies, toddlers, and young children expressed a real sense of care for the world around them, especially nature. It wasn't just about being in nature, it was also about being of nature. Their connections to the environment really pushed for a stronger focus on sustainability within the framework. Also, I suppose there's diversity, equity, and inclusion. They really showed us that these aren't separate topics to babies, toddlers, and young children, that they're woven into their everyday experiences, their identities, their languages, their families. All of these shape how they belong, how they play, how they learn. Um, the other real insight as well was play. Again, we all know the importance of play, and that's very strong in Aistear. But in the revised Aistear, we're looking more focused on play and hands-on experiences. So no real surprise there, because we know play is at the heart of early learning. It's what's new, I suppose, is maybe the more of an emphasis on the outdoor play and nature pedagogy, and the educator's role in nurturing creativity, curiosity, that sense of wonder and awe, through the outdoors and open-ended experiences. And then, of course, transitions. Can't go without talking about a little bit about transitions. And I don't mean the big transitions like starting school, but the small everyday transitions like going from lunch to activities, activity to activity, indoors, outdoors. Um, Babies, toddlers, and young children really said they really value continuity, the flow of their day, the presence of familiar people and routines. So all of these insights led into the draft of the revised Aistear. And I suppose this is the really cool bit, was phase two of the project, which brought the babies, the toddlers, and the children back in again. So they got to give kind of feedback on the proposed changes. So it was a real consultation with integrity, I suppose. So when we say this is a child-led curriculum, we mean it. The babies, toddlers, and young children actually helped shape it. Their voices, through play, expression, relationships, they're embedded in in the heart of the new Aistear and the new revised Aistear. And I suppose if you're an educator, a parent, or a policymaker, even, the key takeaway here is that, young babies, toddlers, and young children can really, they can and they do tell us what they need. And we just have to listen. We have to observe and we have to create the space for their voices. And that's what NCCA did here. And we just had the pleasure of carrying it out. So it was
Carrying it out.
great.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the space and believing that they're capable. I
Yeah,
mean, if you um, watch, look, listen,
yeah,
you can see how much babies, toddlers, and young children can make it very clear what they like
yeah.
and don't like. And I really like the fact that the educators were so involved
I was just going to
because
say
they
it was
know the
key.
babies and toddlers more than an external person going in observing, because that
Yeah. It
changes
was
the
key. It was
dynamic.
key to the I suppose to the data collection. Um and we learned so much from them. We had obviously colleagues, ourselves, Maynooth and Stranmillis, used to come together and try and work out how we were going to do this. What tools could we develop to support the educators in gathering the data? Maybe a little workshop on, gathering data or, filling in maybe a framework or some kind of any kind of supports to help them. And it really showed how the educators came with such experience. They knew the children so well. And we really co-constructed all of that together. So part maybe so naively we thought we were going teaching, but they taught us so much as well. So without them, it would have been this whole thing would not have been possible at all. And the rich data that they collected from babies, toddlers, and young children was just phenomenal. And then being able to go through it and what the children were actually telling us and interpreting that data, it was a huge piece of work, but it was such a worthwhile piece of work as well. Yeah,
Yeah, it sounds it, and we'll turn to the principles now. But it's lovely to hear you, identifying the bits of data, and then the clear influence that it had, to quote from Lundy, as well as the consultation.
absolutely. Yeah,
So we're going to focus primarily on in our conversation on the principles, Fiona, and we look at the themes and some other aspects later on in the series. But I suppose I wanted. Why do you think the principles are? I mean, why are they there? Why are they? You know, why the principles are important? I think it's something, back in the day, we used to talk about the way that sometimes the principles tended to be maybe a little bit overlooked. And
yeah.
that's why I kind of really wanted to start with the principles, because really they underpin the whole framework, don't they?
Yeah, they absolutely do. And I think, even though they to look at them, they have decreased from 12 to 9. But absolutely they've lost nothing. And I think that it shows, the care and the attention that went into the review of Aistear. For me, the 9 principles in the revised Aistear, I suppose, are really the heartbeat of the entire curriculum framework. They're not just nice ideas on paper. They guide everything we do with babies, toddlers, and young children within our settings. And each principle offers a lens, I suppose, through which we can understand and support young babies, toddlers, and young children's learning and development. And that's really key. So practically, I suppose the principles, as I said, have been reduced from 12 to 9, but with these merging of elements of the original, there've been a few changes to the text. So there's the new principle on transitions that I just kind of talked about already a little bit. But, you know, what I think is the changes really reflect the key messages from the consultation. So they really looked at children's rights, pedagogy, inclusion, outdoor learning, well-being, sustainability. And the beauty of the principles is that they're rooted in research and they reflect, and I think you alluded to this already, where we now as a society, in terms of understanding babies, toddlers, and young children, childhood, learning, where we all are in this society now. And they help us to make sure that our practice is both current and meaningful. So even if you take, for example, the principle around the agentic global citizen, it reminds us that babies, toddlers, and young children are active citizens, that they have a voice, they deserve to be listened to and taken seriously. And that really shapes how we include them in decision making, even from a really very young age. And I suppose our consultation really showed and is proof of that. Um, then there's the emphasis on relationships and interactions. And again, we highlighted this in our consultation. It must have come up in other consultations. But Asher's always highlighted how vital warm, responsive relationships are to children's learning, to their well-being. But it's not just about what we teach, it's about how we connect, and that's really come through in this in how they've looked at relationships and interactions here, and that whole concept of building friendships, connecting with community, connecting with the educator and the family. So it's all encompassing. Um,
And I
again, I
think, you
go ahead.
mentioned about the principles reducing. They've
Yeah,
still managed to introduce some new terms like agentic. The
they have.
interactions have been included with equity has been included. Agency applies to the educator as well as to the child. So
It does.
that regrouping has been very cleverly done to
Yeah,
lose nothing, gain something, and still there are three fewer principles, which I think goes to show how interconnected they all were anyway. That, like you
exactly.
say, they've
Yeah,
lost nothing in the reduction of the number. And do you want to talk a little bit about some of those new concepts, like
yeah.
the
So
agentic educator, I suppose, in particular, because a lot is expected of educators, and it's I think it's really good that it's the agentic educator that they can take responsibility for. You mentioned about how well the educators in the consultation knew their children. There's
yeah,
nobody better to work with children and follow their interests and um, support their learning than people who really know them well, rather than
yeah.
having to take a book off the shelf kind of thing and see what are we supposed to be doing this week.
Absolutely, exactly. And you talk about some of the key messages and the ideas and the principles and themes being interwoven, I suppose, and you're so right, within and throughout the framework. You've identified some of the terminology that's been adopted to reflect policy and I suppose some changes in the sector that's happened. So even practitioner and adult has been changed to educator. And as you say, that agentic educator, he, she to they, equality to equity, needs to rights. Um, Even the term babies, toddlers, and young children has been, has replaced just children. So that's to ensure that all of the three age groups are clearly visible within the framework at all times. Yeah, there's a focus as well on our culture and our linguistic history and story as part of this as well. And this is a piece I like a little bit, is the phrases and the proverbs Oscailga, and I think they've been embedded throughout the framework as well. And they've been there they've been used to promote, I suppose, Irish language in everyday by the educators, which is fantastic. And for us in early childhood Ireland, the impact, I suppose, of these changes is huge in relation to the resources and the CPD that we're developing for our members. We need to ensure that our work reflects all of these terms to support educators with understanding their meaning and the revised framework. And even though we've always had an emphasis on the rights of babies, toddlers, and young children, we now need to be using language and developing words that support educators to continually respect babies, toddlers, and young children as agentic, competent, confident, and understanding, as you said, that agentic means they have a voice and they can influence and their own learning. That's so important. Another aspect of our work, I think, that would, we need to support educators is understanding of sustainability in nurturing babies, toddlers, and young children, to care for themselves, for others, and for the environment. So, and I know you've had podcasts in relation to our project on eco emotions, which is in its second year. Um, and that has a wide variety of opportunities for educators to reflect on their sustainability practices and really think about how they're doing that. And Aistear is really supporting that idea of um, babies, toddlers, and young children as global citizens and moving towards a workable, usable understanding of sustainability. So this is really reflects our current and our future work. Yeah, I think as well, mentioned before in the consultation and the principles, there's a renewed emphasis on the relationships being at the heart of learning, friendships being valued. They're huge, and also
Huge.
communities and um, learning environments. And one of our projects that we're actually involved in at the moment is called TIME. So that's called an acronym for Thriving Interactions Through Meaningful Engagements, which really resonates with the whole concept highlighted in the revised Aistear regarding that slow relational pedagogy. So it's really impacting all of our work. And we are trying to bring out these new terms, that have been identified within Aistear, so we can all begin to use them, more comfortably and understand what is the meaning behind them and the reason why they're there. But yeah, I think they're all really welcome additions. Yeah.
Thanks, Fiona. It's really interesting to hear how, the update is influencing our work. That, while at the moment there's a familiarization process going on, you'll see lots of webinars and so on, podcasts and that about the changes and the updates. It's from September really that it will be um, I suppose, making an impact in settings. But, we know that educators are, as ever, kind of ahead of the curve and starting to, while it's influencing future practice, it's also has come from the practice that has evolved over the past 12, 13
Yeah.
years since the original Aistear came in. So
Yeah.
in relation to the principles and our work and so on, is there anything else you want to add?
I suppose really just, yeah, I think, I just reiterate how welcome, these developments have been received by the sector, but by Early Childhood Ireland particularly. I feel they really resonate with our mission, our values, our ethos as an organisation. And as I said, they're going to be reflected in our work going forward. And we've always, the child is at the center of everything that we do. And I think that this revised Aistear is also really showing how the child is and the voice of the child is so important. And, as I said, even being part of the consultation has just been fantastic that they have been respected enough to be involved.
Great piece of work.
It was a
And
huge
yeah,
piece of
yeah.
work. Yeah.
And the
Um,
friendships one was really interesting because
yeah.
I sat on the development group and, in the consultation with parents and educators and so on, the friendships piece wasn't as clearly expressed as it was from the children themselves, from the babies, toddlers, and young children.
Oh,
Um,
yeah.
so it just
Yeah.
goes to show how important it is to involve, you know, some of the main stakeholders. I mean, any other piece of research that you do
Yeah. It's
involves
so
all the
true.
stakeholders,
Yeah.
and so involving the babies, toddlers, and young children in this was vital
Yeah,
and so
I honestly,
worthwhile.
it's so worthwhile. And I think, having relationships and interactions as one of the principles, would it have happened if the babies, toddlers, and young children weren't consulted?
Yeah,
It's a
yeah,
question. I mean, they really told us in the consultation, how important they were, how that time slow everything down, that slow relational pedagogy concept, friendships, supporting those connections between the child's social worlds, how important all of that was, so they wanted us in, come into their world. So it was
Yeah.
really, really interesting. Yeah.
For me, that visibility of the slow relational pedagogy is, one of the key things that I love, because
Yeah.
we just need to slow it all down. It's the world is fast enough. Just,
Yeah.
take it slow. Take
Yeah.
it slow.
Yeah.
Fiona,
Absolutely.
thank you so much.
Oh, Maura, thank you.
Really enjoyed that. And thanks very much for taking the time to tell us about the research and the impact it had on the principles. So thanks a million, Fiona.
Not at all. It's my pleasure. Thanks, Maura.
And thank you for listening to this episode of Early Childhood Ireland's podcast, which is proudly supported by Erica's Insurance. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe, spread the word to your friends and colleagues, and stay tuned for our next episode.